on this computer. Okay, so good morning. We have finally made it. We are at Rails. Today we are going to talk about Rails and get started with it. So first, quickly, what is Rails? What is Rails, John Conway?
It's like Sinatra, but strict.
It's like Sinatra, but strict?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good start. That's a good start. What else? What else do you know about Rails?
Automated Sinatra.
Automated Sinatra. That's a good way to think about it too. Yes. Rails actually came before Sinatra, and it is a framework written in Ruby. It's true, it does have a lot of automation built into it. It also has a lot of opinions about how things should be done. It adheres very strictly to the model view controller paradigm, which if we haven't gotten into in depth, we'll definitely hit harder next week, but I don't want to pile too much on. But it also, it's going to allow us to automate a lot of our, a lot of the building of a CRUD app, which is how I'm going to introduce Rails to you. We're going to go through and build a CRUD app together, right? So Rails is a gem, just like any other gem. It's just an enormous gem. Let's see. Rails. Cool. So it's an open source project. Here it is right here. Maintained by the community, right? So you can see there's 69,000 commits. There are over 3,000 contributors. A good rule of thumb, if we haven't gone over this before, if you're using a gem and you want to know, is this gem being maintained? Is this a good thing? Like, is it something that I can trust? Seeing that a lot of people are working on it, that a lot of people are committing it, and this has commits from 2 days ago, a day ago, 20 days ago. So you can see that it is constantly being updated and maintained, right? Rails obviously has this going on. You can check this with any gem that you want to use. So Rails was created because the creator of Rails found that he was doing the same things over and over again. You probably saw yesterday that when you were building your app in Sinatra, you're building a CRUD app in Sinatra, that there was a lot of tedious stuff. And you can imagine we were doing this for like 1, 2 resources, right? If you had dozens of resources and you had to set up all those routes over and over and over again and set up all of this stuff, you could see that it's a lot of repeated work, right? And so like when developers, when engineers see that they're repeating something over and over and over again, it's usually a good sign that there's a tool, there's a way to sort of automate some of that process. And that's what Rails aims to do. Okay, so let's get started with it. So what we're going to do, or what I'm hoping to do today, is introduce you to Rails, introduce you to some of the things that it can do, and then also try to build in a review of CRUD, because I know we kind of spent just the afternoon yesterday on CRUD. We're going to be repeating, you're going to be making CRUD apps for the rest of the time here. So if it hasn't already been beaten into your head, don't worry. You're going to have plenty of practice. On Monday, we're going to have kind of a catch-up day where you're going to have a chance to play with Rails some more and enforce some of the CRUD app stuff. Cool? But we're going to build a CRUD app in Rails, a very small one, that can manage businesses. So we're just going to have a database with a list of businesses, the description of what they are, their address, stuff like that. And we're going to be able to CRUD everything about the business. So we'll be able to create businesses, read our database, what we have, update businesses, and delete them. Cool? All right, so let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do, and again, I'm going through all of this is in your curriculum. So when I'm done, you're going to be able to go through all of this. But you're going to install Rails, and that's just a gem. So you're going to do gem install Rails. I'm not going to do it because I already have it. But this is going to install all sorts of stuff, a bunch of dependencies that Rails has. It might take a minute or two. Cool. All right. Once we have Rails, we can start a new Rails project, and we're going to do that with Rails new. This is -d. I'm going to explain all this in a second. Let me just Postgres. Well, So before I run this, let me go over what I have here. So the first command I'm doing is I'm starting a new Rails project by calling Rails new. That starts a new project. I'm giving the project a name. Businesses is just what I'm calling it right now. I could call it anything, right? Whatever I wanted my app to be. If I was ripping off Twitter, then I would do Rails new Twitter ripoff or whatever, right? -D is setting the database and telling Rails, I want to use Postgres for my database. By default, Rails ships with SQLite, I believe, which is fine for toy apps and for like doing like a quick mock-up of something. But when we want to deploy something, Postgres can handle huge volumes, right? So we just want to start you off with that right away. This is normally kind of how, if you're going to start something that you wanted to deploy and you want to have a lot of users, these tags that I'm throwing in are a good baseline to start any app. So we're telling Rails to ignore its default and to use Postgres. This -T is Rails has its own testing suite, but we're not going to use that. We are going to use RSpec. So -T is just saying don't load the default Rails testing suite. I actually don't even know what it is. I've always just done -T and used RSpec, so we'll load in RSpec later. And then this last thing, no turbolinks. Turbolinks is a feature that allows, and I've always turned turbolinks off too, because it's a JavaScript feature that just allows quicker loads when you click links. Instead of like clicking a link and having to load the whole page again, Turbolinks has some built-in functionality where you're only loading part of the page. Like it will know kind of what changed and what it needs to go get. But we're going to be using React for that later. And importing other JavaScript libraries sometimes can conflict with Turbolinks. So a lot of people just turn it off. It's an interesting topic. It's a feature that some people kind of champion, some people think is annoying and just like gets in the way too much. It's something I would encourage, if you're interested in it, to look into a little bit more. We're not really going to play with it a lot. So we're going to turn it off by default, or I mean for most of what we do. Cool, so that's what we get. So we're making a new Rails project. We're calling it businesses. We're setting our database. We're turning off the default test, and we're turning off Turbolinks. So now I'm going to hit enter. And I'm doing this on my desktop, by the way. And all of this stuff is going to happen. And we'll go over all of this in a second. This might take a second. This is all Rails. Okay. So what happened? Rails basically created a new Rails project. You can see it right here on my desktop. Businesses folder showed up. Let's go up and look. So Rails created all of these files. So it created a README, a rake file. We're not going to read all of them. I'm going to go through them in a minute. It created a gem file, put a bunch of gems in there. It then initiated a Git repository for me. So I already have a Git repository. Rails will do that automatically for you. It'll create a bunch more files. We'll talk about them in a second. Then down here, it actually runs bundle install for you. So it will install all of your gems and update anything it needs to update. That's what's happening all down here. After it creates all its files, it runs bundle install on its own, installs all our gems, and there we go. That's what we have. So let's check out what we have here. I'm going to CD into, oh no, I still have my one from yesterday. Which is which? I don't think it matters. Damn it. Oh, this one I spelled wrong, so that's easy. Cool. All right. Businesses. I'm going to open it in VS Code, which means I'm not going to need this anymore. All right. So all of this over here, this is Rails. This is what Rails gives us. So it's quite a lot. Gives us a bunch of directories, a bunch of folders. We're going to walk through them a little bit. Again, there's a breakdown of this in your curriculum, so please don't feel like you have to memorize this. But I just want to take you on like a quick tour of what this is, where we're going to be developing for a while, right? So getting used to moving around this file structure is something that will come with time, but that you're going to have to get used to. The bulk of what we're going to be doing and using is going to live in app. So our app folder here is going to hold a bunch of different stuff. Our assets, this is where our images, any of our JavaScript files, any of our CSS is going to live in our style sheets. That's what we're going to keep in our assets. Channels is for if you've ever been to a website and like a chat app will pop up in the corner. Someone will say, like, if you need help, we can talk. You know what I'm talking about? Has anybody ever seen that before? Yes. Thanks, Michael. So that's using a technology called WebSockets. So we've been talking about HTTP requests that are stateless, right? So I make a request to the server responds, the connection is broken, right? Then we're done. In order to have anything like a chat app, we need it to be continuously open, right? That's how we have that functionality where it's like, I can see that the other person is typing on the other end. That's because that channel is open at all times. The way Rails has chosen to implement that is with something called ActionCable. Pretty sure that's what it's called. Yeah, ActionCable right here. And so if you wanted to set up that functionality, if you wanted to set up a chat app or something like that that needed that constant open communication, this is where that code would live. We're not going to do anything with that today, but just so you know, that option is there. There are a lot of tutorials about how to set this up. It's actually pretty quick in Rails. You can do it with just a few lines of code. It implements it pretty well. That's where that would live. So that's our channels. Controllers we kind of already seen, right? This is where we're going to put the logic that kind of handles our requests. Might talk to our models, might talk to our views, figure out what we need to send back to our user. Helpers is where we're going to put any logic that we need to help us render our views. This will come into play a little bit down the line. We probably won't use it today. But we might have methods. You know, we're writing Ruby with our HTML now, right? We've been putting Ruby into our views, running Ruby before we send our views off to our users. As our apps grow, the logic that we want to do in the views might get more complicated. And you might want to start defining some methods that are going to do some things for you. Maybe filter the resources and decide like what you want to render based on what resources were requested, etc. Rather than putting that logic in the view, we need a place to put it. And so that's what our helpers are. Jobs in Rails, we'll spend a day on this, I think, next week. This is if I need something to happen in my app and I don't want to like fully stop my app, because like code runs kind of in order, does this, then does this, then does this. I can set up a job, and a job is just something that tells Rails like, hey, like do this when you get a chance, or do this later. Maybe I want to send an email to all of my users like every 2 weeks or something like that, right? I can set something like that up, like do this at a certain time, or do this when you're not using other resources, something like that, right? So jobs is sort of just code I want to run later, or run in the background, or run on a timer, something like that. That's where you'll set up jobs. Mailers is if I want to send email to people, that's what mailers is. Models we've already talked about. So this is kind of the representation of our database tables in our code. Our models will live in models. Views, we already know what that is too. So our views are basically our HTML. So that's app. Cool. There's a couple other things here. I'm not going to go through everything. Bin has a bunch of Rails tools that help us out. We're typically not going to be doing anything in bin, so we'll leave that alone. Config holds a lot of the configuration for the app, just setting up certain, what is the word I'm looking for? Features, that's not even the right thing. Settings, stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of that living in the app. Again, you can see how many files there are. We're not going to be able to go over every single thing. The important thing that we're going to be playing with today that lives in config are my routes. So when we've been using Sinatra, we've been defining our routes in the controller, right? So the controller is where all our routes are living and where we're kind of handling what to do when those routes get hit. In the interest of separating concerns and kind of having one file do one thing, the creators of Rails decided like we're going to pull all those routes, we're going to handle them one place. So we'll handle the routing in one place. The routes will send the request to the appropriate controller, and then the controller can handle figuring out what to do from there, right? So now all our routes will live in routes. We'll revisit this in a little bit. Database is where we're going to set up our database. So right now we just have a seeds file. In a minute, we'll create some migrations. Our migrations will live here as well. Let's see, what else? Lib is if we're pulling in any third-party libraries, we will put them in our lib folder. Our log is going to keep track of all of our log files for us. Public is still the same. Any assets that we want to deliver kind of unmodified, we don't need to touch, will live in public. Seen that before. Storage, I don't really remember what storage is. It's not in my notes either. I'm gonna have to get back to you on storage. Temp is where Rails will hold files that it wants to delete. We don't really need to talk about that right now. The rest of these, what else is important here? Our gem file. This is an important place where we will probably we'll do some stuff today, and you'll continue to do stuff. So you can see Rails loads a bunch of gems automatically, right? Puma is our server. Let's see. There's a bunch of stuff in here. SAS is for JavaScript, right? Here's TurboLinks, which we turned off. And then you can see that there are a bunch of gems commented out, right? These are things that you might not necessarily need by default, but they're so common and they're used so often that they're thrown in there for us. They're just not loaded in right away. So all we need to do is uncomment them. bcrypt is one that we'll probably use. That's for handling authentication. When we start talking about getting users, storing their passwords, that stuff next week, we'll probably use bcrypt, or we might just go right to devise. Anyway, that's what that is for. You can see some of these are only loaded like when we're in development. Some, this is for development test. Some of these are only loaded when we're just in development, etc. Cool. So there's a lot going on in the gem file. Feel free to read through it, check out some of the other stuff in here. Again, we don't have time to go over every single thing, but you'll grow more familiar with it as we go. Any initial questions just about, I know this is a lot. Please don't think that you need to memorize all of this. When you are going through this, you'll probably be Googling a lot. What is this file? Where do I find this other thing? You'll get used to it as you play with it more. But just initial questions about what Rails gives you. We've set up, now we can start coding. We've set up our Rails.
What is uglifier?
What is uglifier? Where is that? Right here. You know what? I don't remember. Let's see. Oh, yeah, okay, so uglifier is a code minification tool. I believe it just packages up your JavaScript. So do you remember when we were loading in those CDNs and we had the, when we were playing with jQuery, we had the option to get like the full jQuery, or we could do minified, or we could do, there was maybe one other, Slim, I think was one. And minified was just like it removes all the white space, right? It just shrinks your file so that you're not sending as big of a file. Because once you've written the code and you're sending it to the browser doesn't care about that white space. It skips over it anyway. So you can just put it all into one big chunk. That's completely unreadable for humans, but we don't care at that point, right? So I believe that's what uglifier is doing. Any JavaScript you write, it's going to cram it all together. Cool. Other questions? Okay, cool. Let me know as they come up. I have my terminal down here now. Great. So there are a couple of other things I want to do before we actually start coding our business app. I do want to set up RSpec, so I have to set up RSpec. Let Rails know that I want to use RSpec for my testing. I do that. I need to load in a gem here. Where you add your gems, I believe, is up to you. Some people will wedge them in here. Any gems I add on my own, this is just a personal thing, I put at the bottom just so I can go grab them right away. I know, like, if there's a problem and I want to make sure it's not something I added, I put them all at the bottom. I'm not really sure if there's a super best practice for that. So I'm going to do gem RSpec dash Rails. And I also know that I'm going to need Faker later, too, so I'm going to load that in, too. Have we played with Faker yet? to get fake data? Some people are nodding yes, and some people are saying no. Well, we'll see it today. We'll play with it today. Cool. So I've added more gems. So I need to bundle install. I think I can just do bundle. Cool. And that's going to load. That'll go through again, make sure I'm using what I need, and fetch the gems that I don't have yet. Cool. All right, so I've told Rails that I want to use RSpec. Now I need to set up RSpec. I can do that pretty easily too. So this is bundle. I have bundle exec as BE as well. You're going to do bundle exec Rails. Oh, I want to show you one thing real quick. Where does that live? Before we've been doing rake, right? Here it is in bin. We've been doing rake to like rake db migrate, right? You can still run rake in Rails. It's backwards compatible, but now you can also just write Rails, and that's what you're going to see me doing too. So Rails is just like in place of rake, right? It's giving us these tasks that otherwise would take a lot more code to run. And this is where, if you're curious about how those are set up, you can check out these files. That's where those are set up. But I'm going to do BE Rails. So I'm going to run this Rails command. Generate RSpec install. It's going to take a while, but it's going to do. So you can see it does a couple of things for me. Again, it's going to show you what it did, right? So it created some files for me. It created a spec folder right here. So now I have my spec folder. And it created some helper files for me too. So now all of my tests I can start putting in here. Cool. So that's it. We've just set up RSpec. So now I want to start. Now I want to start setting up my my CRUD app, right? And so just to remind everybody, CRUD stands for
Create, retrieve, update, destroy.
Create, read, update, and destroy. Yes. We're going to have something to create, read, update, and destroy. So what's our first thing when we want to set something up, when we start setting up an app like this, and we know we're going to have businesses? That's what I want to create, update, and destroy. Does anybody remember what our first step is here? It's the first thing we need to do.
Make the data.
Yeah, make a database, right? And then migrate that database, put some tables in it, and then after that, we're going to get some data in there, right? So before we deal with creating, actually Rails created a database for us. We're going to drop it and recreate it in a second, just so you can see that being done. But before we do that, I want to create my migration. So Rails will do that for me. I can do BE Rails. So again, you're going to see this pattern, BE Rails, right? You're going to see that over and over again. Last time I did, it was BE Rails generate and then RSpec install. Generate is a command that you're going to be able to use for a lot of different things. It's also aliased to just G. So that's what I'm going to use just to save myself some typing. But G is just for generate. Generate would work as well. It's the same thing. G, migration. And I'm just going to tell it what the migration is. Create businesses. Did I spell that right? Looks like it. Oh, right? Yeah. It's so small on my computer, I can't tell. Okay, if I have too many S's. Okay, cool. So I'm going to do this. Rails is going to create the migration for me. So now if I go into my database, it's created this migrate folder. And then here is my migration. And so this sets up all sorts of stuff for you. First of all, it puts, see all these numbers here? This is our date and time tag, right? So it's 2018, June 13th, then the time to, I think, milliseconds. Cool. So we have a class, create businesses. This should be familiar, right? It's inheriting from active record migration, something that we've already done with Sinatra. We've already played with active record several times in the last 7 weeks. And so active record is part of Rails. That's how Rails works. That's why we've been playing with it for so long. It's a separate gem. You can use it separately, but it comes built in with Rails. And then right here is my create table. So now all I have to do is add the attributes that I want. So let's say a business has a name. Let's say a business has an address. Say a business has a description. Cool. And then I'm going to do my timestamps at the bottom.
You spelled timestamps. Oh no, never mind. You did it. I just kept it.
Oh, okay. That's all right. I would have believed you. Cool. Let's see. What? Oh. Okay, cool. So we have this set up. So what is the next thing I do once I set up my migration? Seed it. You're missing one step. Can't seed it yet.
Drop something.
We wrote the migration, but we got to do something with it.
No, we have to actually tell it to migrate.
Yeah, we have to run the migration. So Ed, you're just one step ahead, right? We're gonna run this migration, create the table, then we will seed the database. Before I do that, though, I want to show you another feature that Rails has. So before I actually run my migration, I need a model to go with my table. So this is another pattern that we've seen, right? When we have a table in our database, usually a good bet that we're going to need a model to represent that data in Ruby, right? That's our model is kind of like we take our rows from our database, we create objects out of them using our model, which is just a class, and that's how we can manipulate and show and access the data in Ruby. So Rails has another generator for that, Rails G model business. And so remember, like when we're doing our migration, it's businesses because our table's holding a bunch of businesses. When we create our models, it's singular, right? Because we're just going each instance is one business, right? Rails G model business. Oh, and it blows up. It does not work. So it turns out that if I generate a model, again, Rails is this convention over configuration, I believe, is the kind of motto of Rails, right? So it's just assuming, look, if you're going to make a model, we are assuming that you're going to have a corresponding table in your database. And so we're going to make a migration for you right away, right? So what's happening here is it's trying to make the migration because it's just assuming it needs one. It's finding that one already exists and it's blowing up. It doesn't know what to do, right? So just to see that work, I'm going to delete this entire thing that we wrote. Let me copy this first just so we have it. I'm going to delete even this whole folder. Cool. And let's try running this one more time. Cool. So it has created our migration, and it named it for us, create businesses. It pluralized it for us. And then in app models, it created a business model. It also created a spec file for us as well. Yes, Josh?
How does it know what words plural and singular forms are?
Magic.
Wow.
Magic. Yes, it does pluralization very well. I think that's actually an active record feature. Say that again.
Does it do it for stuff like IES?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
And it will, I think it will even do stuff like
Cacti?
person, people.
Does it do cacti?
I don't know if it does cacti specifically, but that would be a fun thing for you to try out later. Cool. Let's take a quick look at what it created for us. So we ran, what do we want? Okay, so we want our migration. So here's our migration. It even threw timestamps in there for us this time. I'm going to throw these back in here. And then it also created our, this thing never refreshes. There it is. So just, sorry, 'cause I know it's confusing to jump around. We have this huge file now. So I'm going into app. I have a folder for my models, and then here is my models file, right? Inheriting from application record. Again, similar to Sinatra, right? Cool. So I have everything set up. Let's do one more thing. I'm going to throw some validations in here. Validates. name isn't true. What do these validations do?
They validate that it is that they actually are there. So if it's not there, then it won't actually save it. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So it makes sure it's kind of like this layer in between, or this this check in between our model and our database, right? Before anything gets saved to the database, Active Record will validate that name and address exist. If they don't, then it won't save it to the database. This is similar to, we could also set on our in our table, we could set null false, right? This is just another layer of security for that, right? Again, making sure that we have useful data in our database and we're not saving like a lot of empty rows or empty empty columns, etc. Cool. So we have this. Let's see what we want to do next. Cool. So now we have everything set up. We still have not migrated our database. So just so we can see how this works, I'm gonna actually drop our database first. So we had a business development and we had a business test database. Those were dropped. Now I can create them again. Cool. And this name businesses is coming, I don't want to confuse them. This is not coming from the model. We also named the app businesses. So that's what it's coming from. Again, if I had named the app Twitter clone, then it would be Twitter clone development, Twitter clone test. Cool. Then the next thing I want to do is actually migrate. We're finally there. That's going to create my businesses table. And then, we didn't set up our seed file. Let's do that real quick. So here's our seed file. I'm going to actually pull this right from the curriculum. Cool. What is this doing? Real quick, it's just doing a loop 10 times. It's calling the model businesses, or business that we created earlier. It's calling create, and then it's just passing some attributes. So Faker, for those of you who don't know, it's just a gem. And it allows you to create fake dummy data for your database. Kind of cool if let's see. Just to show you real quick. It gives you kind of a lot of options. A lot of it's kind of silly, fun data. Over here. But you can see down here, so you can get fake addresses, fake app names, fake beers. What else is there? There's a lot. There's an Elder Scrolls one, a Family Guy one. I'm sure there is a Simpsons one down here, Star Trek, etc. And if you click on one of these, like Star Wars, you can see I can get, let's see, like a droid name. I can get planet names, etc. Right. So again, it's just a way to get. This will just randomly generate data for you based on whatever category you give it. What category are we using over here? We are using a fake company category. So again, this is just like a list of data someone collected and is allowing you to like randomly choose from. So we're going to pick a fake company name. We're going to pick a fake company address, street, and city. And we are also going to get a fake company. BS literally stands for bullshit, I think. It's like fake company BS that they use to describe. We'll see it. But anyway, this is just our dummy data. Seed. Cool. So we've seeded our database. We can check this. Hopefully you've been using, or you have discovered at this point, the Rake console, which allows you to use Active Record to query the database without, or it will load everything in and allow you to kind of like work through your app, interact with your app through the command line. Rails has the same thing. It's just called Rails console. And actually, you can shorten it to Rails C, but it could also be console. So this will load everything in, and now I can interact with the database. So, and I can see all my businesses. just check out the first one, and we can see we have, so it gave it an ID. The name is whatever the hell that says. It has an address. The description is repurpose cross-media e-commerce, right? So this thing that sounds like it means something, but almost certainly does not. Cool. Questions so far? We've kind of set our we've set up our base, right? Now we can start creating, reading, updating, and destroying stuff in our database, or in our app. Okay. I'm going to open another. So now I have 2 profiles open, and one of them I'm going to run my server. What was the command for this before?
Bundle exec shotgun.
Yeah, we were using bundle exec shotgun. Rails is going to have that like reloading built in, right? So we're not going to have to keep restarting our server every time we make a change in our app. So all we are going to have to run is Rails server or Rails S. So you notice a lot of these things are shortened to just the first letter, right? Rails generate is Rails G. Rails, what was the other one that I just talked about? Console is Rails C. Rails server, Rails S. And now I'm running my server. Yes, Michael.
So Rails S goes into the app file and you pull out the app.rb file and he runs that.
No, Rails S, I'm not exactly sure the path it takes to get where it needs to go. Probably somewhere in this config where the database is configured, right here. Rails S starts up a server and loads our whole app onto it. That's the short version of it.
Okay.
Make sense? Ish. You're asking like what file does it start? Does it run?
Right, like because you know how we were doing like.
Yeah, we're running the app, right? Because and we were requiring Sinatra, and then when we ran that app, Sinatra knew like that's how I want to start, right? I am not sure the complexity of what's going on behind the scenes, like what file it starts and how it trickles down. This is a thing about Rails that is like magic and also, or like really great and convenient, and also a little bit frustrating, especially as you're learning, is it's doing a lot for you behind the scenes. And a lot of that code isn't really present, right? It's sometimes that code isn't like right in your face. You have to dig. It's not going to show up in our directory like this. We might have to dig down into the gem to really see how it works. I wouldn't worry about it right now. That stuff that's not really something you're going to have to interact with at this point. But it's good. Those are good, curious questions, right? Always be asking like, how does this work? How does this work? The short answer, the thing that's important to us right now, is that everything we've written, the app that we have created is now running on a server on our local host, and that it will update automatically to a certain point without us having to restart it. Cool. So good question, and sorry I didn't have a good answer for it. Okay, so you can see right now Rails is going to default to port 3000. There are settings we can change to change that, but for right now we're just going to leave it. So we're running on localhost 3000, so let's actually have a look at that. Cool, yay, you're on Rails. So we haven't set up any views. We haven't really told Rails to do anything. So it just has this default that lets us know we are running Rails, and we have connected to it on our local host. Cool? All right, so now we can start actually building stuff. Get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. Cool, so let's take a brief moment to let me shrink this down. Talk about our RESTful routes and how they relate to our CRUD app, right? So CRUD that's kind of like what we want to do. That's a description of how our app works and what it does. And then we briefly talked about yesterday this idea of RESTful routes. I already forgot what RESTful stands for, even though we looked it up yesterday. The important thing to know is it's this list of 7 routes. It is a convention that allows us to kind of predict what we're going to get at each route, right? Rather than kind of having this chaos of people just making up routes and no one knows what to call everything, right? This convention kind of came into play, this best practice of setting your routes up like this. And you will have these 7 routes. If you're going to have a full CRUD app, you would have these 7 routes for each resource that you're allowing people to consume, right? So I'm trying to think of something where I would have like more, like, okay, so like Amazon, a small version of Amazon, right, would have RESTful routes for products that would allow us to see all the products. But then they would probably also have like, and this is getting into nesting, I don't want to get too far on this, but they would have like product categories, right? So I don't want to see every product Amazon has. That's millions of products, right? I just want to see like all of their Walkman, because I want a Walkman for some reason. And so there would be a route for like, show me all your Walkman, show me one specific one, et cetera, right? Cool. That was maybe not the best example, but hopefully you're getting. So I'm going to go over these real quick because we are going to create all 7 of these routes and talk about why they exist and what they're doing. I want to call your attention to, so this chart, I believe we posted up in Slack. It's a really good resource. I also found this in 2 seconds by Googling RESTful routes. I want to talk about these columns real quick, and then we'll start building. So we have a couple of things we need to keep track of when we're creating a route. First, we need to know what is the HTTP verb. The verb is like a description of like what is the, it's sort of like an umbrella for what is this request generally want, right? When we have a GET request, it's saying like, it's just retrieving something. Just give me something back. We can send data with a GET request, but again, we can't send as much as we can with a POST, and we don't have as many options for how to do that, right? So we're limited. But we will be sending small amounts of data because when we make the GET request, we might want to send like, get me this thing with these like parameters, right? So our GET request is just get me something. Our POST is I want to actually make a change to the database, right? I want to create something in the database. We have put and patch here. We're just going to be, they're pretty much interchangeable. There is a slight difference, and I'm blanking on it right now. But for now, we're going to talk about, I think, just put. This is very similar to a POST request, but it's saying I want to update something, right? Put is just saying this resource already exists, and I want to do I want to change it somehow. Whereas POST is saying, like, this resource does not exist, I want to make it. Cool? And then delete's pretty self-explanatory. I want to get rid of it. That's it. So we have these 3. There are other HTTP verbs, but we're just going to pay attention to these 3 right now. Get, post, put, and delete. And with those, we're going to be able to perform these 7 actions. We'll come back to this and go through. I think I just wanted to talk about this. And then we have this convention for our routes. This path is our routes, right? Get to photos is saying, get me all of the photos. You can see that right here. Get to photos new is saying, like, I want to make a new photo. So give me the form so that I can do that. We'll get to that in a minute. Post, I want to create a new photo, etc. I actually think I'm going to stop this and let's just start coding. And then we can come back to questions. But I wanted just to remind you that this is what I'm following as we go through this. Cool. So the first thing I want to do, no one can really do anything in my app because there's nowhere for them to go. So I need to make a route for them to go to, and then I need to create a controller action to respond to that route. So the first route we're going to do is we're just going to do the index, right? So real quick, that's get me all of the businesses, right? So first, I need that route, and I'm just going to tell Rails that I want to create a route. It's going to be a get to /businesses. And then I'm going to have to put this other thing here, and I'll talk about this in a second. Wait a minute, how does this work? Oh, right. Okay, cool. So what is this?
You go to your index page.
Yes, exactly. So I'm making a get when someone makes a get request to /businesses, my routes will direct that request to the pattern here is this is the controller. So it's going to go to the business's controller, and then it's going to run the index action. So it's controller action, controller hashtag action.
Is it the same thing as doing ERB in the file?
Yes, we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that in a second.
Hey, Josh.
But you are getting down the right track. Yes, John.
The on the curriculum, it has get with the / and parentheses, and it doesn't say businesses. Does it make a difference?
That is a great question. So the get to / is just to the root, and we could set it up that way. We could put anything here, technically, right? We can write any route. So if I did a get to /, a get to / would just be our root page, which for us right now is localhost 3000, right? It's like our home page. And so if I did that, then I'm just telling Rails a get to / go to the business's controller and do index. I think the only reason I put it here instinctively was to follow these RESTful routes where we have / businesses, right? So this is just kind of following the convention. If you have good reason to, and eventually when your app gets bigger, you will stray from convention, right? Also, one thing that some people will do too is they'll have a get to the root, which will redirect to a get to whatever the resource business is, right? That's just like adding another layer that I didn't want to get into because I wanted to stay really focused. So that's a great question, John. Your get to root is just your get to / is your root page, which normally you would want to set up. We're just not going to do that right this second. Cool?
Yes,
Does that make sense? Cool. I'm going to keep it as businesses for right now. Cool. So I have this route. Let's see what happens if I visit it. So I've made my route. It's taking way longer than I wanted it to. It's long. Okay. I don't know why that took so long. But here is an error page that you're going to get used to seeing. So we were starting to get some pretty helpful errors from Sinatra, right? Sinatra was throwing a whole page up for us and telling us this is the route you might be missing or this is the view you might be missing. Rails is similar. Right now it's saying uninitialized constant business controller. And the reason for that is it's hitting this route and then it knows I need to go to the business controller and run the index action. Well, we haven't created a business controller yet, a business's controller, so it doesn't know where to go. So again, our routes are sort of directing our development, right? Our errors are telling us what to do. Cool? So let's make a business's controller. We are going to go controllers. All right, so in our controllers, I'm just going to make a new file. I'm going to call it controller.rb. Again, these file naming conventions are important. So I'm businesses_controller.rb. That's going to give me this. I'm just going to copy and paste some code here. Cool. So I have my business's controller. It's inheriting from application controller. Don't worry about this line 2 right now. We'll get to that later. And then I have my action right here. So now I have an action to run. So let's run this and see what error we get now. I'm going to make this. Cool. We have a new error saying business's controller index is missing a template. So it's saying I went into the index action like you told me to, and there was nothing for me to run, right? The reason it knows immediately, what it's immediately looking for is a view. And the reason for that is the way that Rails is set up is it knows that if I have an index action, I expect to have a corresponding view also with that same name, right? So an index action should have an index view. I can run any code I want in here. I can query my database. I can do all sorts of stuff. But Rails knows by default, if I didn't do any of that, it defaults to looking for the route or for the view already. So no longer do we have to do like normally we do ERB index, right? to tell it to go look for that. Rails does that automatically. So all we need to do is create that view, and it will render it. Does that make sense? We're kind of skipping a step here. We can also see all. Okay. Cool. So my next step is I need a view. So I'm going to go into my views folder here. I'm going to make a new folder. Businesses. So I'm going to make, usually for each resource, because I'm going to have these 7 routes for each one. And I'm going to have like all my businesses are going to have an index, a show, what's the other ones? Create, an update, etc. I don't want to, I'm not going to call it businesses index. I'm just going to call it index. So the way we separate them is by putting them in their own folders. Cool. So I'm going to make a new file. This is pretty much the same. There's just one thing we have to add. So instead of doing index.erb, I have to do index.html.erb. Just a small change. And now I can load this file. For some reason, my autocomplete is not working out for my HTML stuff. Cool. So real quick, we're going to do this one more time. We will make a GET request to /businesses. It will get to our app and hit our routes. It will find that that route exists, and it will know I need to go into the business's controller and run the index action. It'll jump into my business's controller, find that I have an index action. Right now, there is no code for it to run, so it will, by default, look for the index view in my views.
Even if it's within a folder.
Yes, it should know that the businesses views will be in a businesses folder. It will know that. As long as I've named it that way. If I named this like my views for my businesses, it won't work. It needs to, so again, Rails, in order for it to automate all this stuff, you need to, it makes a lot of assumptions about where things are and how they're named. So sticking to these naming conventions is important. Let's see if this works. Hopefully I set everything up correctly. Try one more time. And what are we expecting to see if this worked?
The H1 you made? The H1 you made?
That H1 I made that said like we made it to the indexes page. Yeah, we made it. Cool. So we made our GET request. It went through all that stuff. It grabbed this view and returned it. So after it goes through all these layers, when it finally gets to the view, ships that back, right, as a response in the response body. This is not very useful, though. Normally, what do we want to do on our index page? What is our index page for when we're talking about these RESTful routes?
Listing all of the businesses.
Basically just listing every piece of data we have under that model, right? Listing all of those. The word is blanking on the word. Cool. So first we need to get those. We need to get all of the businesses before we can list them. So we can do that by querying the database. Using active records, something we've been doing before. That is ugly. Cool. So what's happening here? I'm going into businesses. You saw me do this in the console earlier, right? Businesses.all is going to return me an array of every business object. Again, active record is going to go into my database, go into my businesses table. It's going to take each row, create a business object that represents that row, cram them all into an array, and deliver them to me. And I'm going to save that in a variable called businesses. The @ symbol, I don't think you have to do that. Maybe you do. I don't remember. You either have to do it or it's a convention. Just do it. Okay? I have to look that up. Anyway, so it's saving it in this variable. Now, any of these variables that I declare, just like we were doing before, in my route, I have access to in my view. So I can bring this into my view now. Which I lost. So hold on, let me find. Oh no, here it is. Cool. So again, I have my index action. It's going to first perform this small bit of Ruby code, this one line, where it's going to set this variable. And then it's going to jump over to my index.html. Now, right now, we're not running any Ruby code in there. We're not really using the ERB part, so it's just going to deliver it. But we're going to change that. We want to run some Ruby code. And so that we don't have to watch me type it all out, I'm just going to copy and paste it. Cool. What is this? Cool. All right. What is this doing? We have an H1 that's just telling us kind of what this is. This is what's important to us, right? We have, again, these greater than percent signs, ice cream cones, whatever you want to call them. What these indicate is that I want to run some Ruby code. So I'm going to put some Ruby in between these. I'm grabbing that variable businesses, right? Which again is just an array of all these objects. I'm going to loop through them with each. And for each one, I'm going to render a list tag. And inside that list tag, I'm going to take the business and I'm going to call business.name on it, right? So remember, each business is an object and it has the name, the address, and the description that we gave it. Cool? So when we run this, we are expecting to see a list of all of the business objects. Just their names, and then one other thing I just want to remind people, if I have the equal sign here, that means that I want to basically print out, render the result of this. If I don't, it means just run this code, but don't print it, don't insert it into the final HTML. That's this equal sign. All right, cool. So let's see what we have now. Refresh, and there we go. We have a list of all of our businesses. Cool. Questions so far? Awesome. Oh, go ahead.
No.
You sure?
Yes.
All right. Great. So this is our this is part of our read, right? Our read kind of has two parts in our CRUD. There's I want to read everything, and I want to be able to read each individual one. Let's see what we're going to do now. And that's what we are going to do next. So right now, I can see a list of all of them. But you can imagine, and if this was a more robust app with more data, there's more to a business than just its name and description, right? Name, address, and description. There might be like a longer description that we have, a list of employees, I don't know, all sorts of stuff, right? So we wouldn't be able to show that for each one all at the same time. So we want the ability to view each one separately. And that's what we want to add. So that's our show action. So this is our index, that's everything. We're going to follow the same process here that we did before. We're going to define a route. We're going to define the action that it goes to. Then we are going to create a view for it to render. Same thing. I got rid of my routes like a fool. There we go. All right, so now I'm in my routes. I can add another one. This one I'm just going to copy and paste.
So you don't have to. So we don't have to do like the code get route and then put the in. So it's just get route and then to.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know why these don't have comments in them, but they should. So let's take a look at this one now, real quick. Now I'm going to make a get to slash businesses, and I'm adding this extra part here. What is this ID? What is this?
That's going to reference the key, the primary key, or the ID of each business.
Yeah, so it's a reference to like what business I want, and I'm able to get those by accessing the ID, which is put in there for me by Active Record, right? Or by Postgres in order. When I have this colon, what does this mean like with this colon ID? It's a symbol. And what is it doing here? It absolutely is a symbol. How does this work?
It's actually just saying that it can be anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what's the word I'm looking for?
placeholder, I heard?
Pattern.
Pattern?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm expecting to see businesses and then something that I am going to, like to your placeholder point, that I'm going to assign to like the variable ID, right? Or the key. The key will be ID, and then whatever I put there will end up being set as the value, right? So this is one way that we are able to send data with our GET request, right? So with this GET request, we need to know which resource specifically you want, because we're only going to show one now. Before, we were showing all of them, so it didn't matter. We didn't need anything from the user. This time we do. So now I have this. It's going to blow up the same way. We won't do this with every single one, but let's just try it real quick. Let's say I want resource 3. And action, it doesn't have a show action. Again, it's going here. It knows that this is the controller. It's looking for this action that does not exist. Let's create a show action. Go into here. I'm going to start copy and pasting just to speed this along. Cool. Oh, come on. Not really. I haven't figured out the auto format for this stuff yet. Cool. All right. So what are we doing right here? We are querying the database again. This time we're using the active record built-in method find, which takes what? How does find work? Anyone remember?
Takes an ID.
Takes an ID, returns the resource at that ID. Just one. And that's what we want. We are getting that ID out of params. So params is working in the same way, right? When we get to the action, we have params. When we get to the form, params will have all the form data in it. Right now, params just has the ID data in it, right? So we're using the params in the same way we did with Sinatra. We're grabbing the actual business that we want. And so then what would our next step be? Once we have what we want, what do we need to do next with it? Display it, right? And we need a view for that. So again, let's see. I'm going to go into, I'm going to get rid of some of this. This is good. I'm going to go into my views. I'm going to specifically go into businesses. I'm going to make a new file. I don't need that anymore. This is my show. So again, I had my index action. I had an index view. Now I have a show action. I'm going to do a show view. .html.erb.
Wait, what? Wait,
So, go ahead.
I missed that the first time.
Okay.
That you did that. I didn't notice that you put .html.erb.
Yeah.
Why did you have to do it like that?
Because you just do.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah, you just do. HTML.erb, it's just this new thing. I am not 100% sure why, but that's what Rails is expecting to allow us the same functionality, right? We can run Ruby in our HTML file. Cool. All right, so we're going to do something very similar here. Oops. Pull this over. We're going to display. So now remember, in our business controller, we have the business right here. We're going to display its name up top in an H1. We don't have to loop through anything, right? Because we're only dealing with one asset here, or one thing. I'm going to display the address. I'm going to get the description. This is not going to work because I set it up differently. Cool. And then I'm doing one more thing here. Once someone is on the show page, I don't want them, and you would hate this if you went to a website, and every single time I wanted to go somewhere, I had to go up into the address bar and type in businesses/show/ or businesses/ what. I mean, how do you even know a resource, right? How do you know the ID? So that's where we start putting this information in the links. And that's how we create a user experience, right? The user doesn't need to know all this stuff. We hide that with links that have descriptions on where they're going, right? So that's what we have right here. This is just going to be a back button that's going to bring me back to what we're going to call our homepage right now, which for us is /businesses. Cool? Let's check this out. So, oh, there's one more thing I want to do here. So the way we have this set up, this will work. If I go to business 3, right, I'm going to get the name, the address, the description, and my back button that takes me back here. But I mean, what do I really want to count? If I want this one, do I want to count down, figure out the number, and put it up in the URL? Absolutely not. I just want to be able to click on it. So we're going to go back into our view for our index, and we're going to make a quick change. So this is where we're listing all of our businesses. Now, we have each business, which means we have access to the name, the description. We also have access to its ID. So we can create a link to that business right here by adding this line. Cool, let's talk about what this is doing. So again, we're looping through all the businesses. For each one, I'm going to make a list item. I'm going to, here's where I'm printing out the business name, but I'm going to wrap the business name in this A tag, which is creates my link. And I'm going to tell that link to go to /businesses. And then here, I'm going to render out the ID for the business. Question on that, because that can make sense. Let's also see what it looks like. So this code will run, and then it will send it to the browser, and we can take a look at what it looks like in the browser too to kind of get an idea. So I'm going to refresh this, and now I'm going to get a list of links. Cool. So if I click on this, it's going to take me to that one. I'm going to go back. Let's take a look at this real quick. So I have all my links here. If I look at the first one, what I had in my code was an href2 businesses / whatever the ID is, and you can see here it rendered out business 1, business 2, etc., all the way down. So now this link knows where to go, and it's matched up with the name. Questions on that? This is a very, very common practice that you'll be doing over and over again. And each one I go to should work, and then I should be able to get back. So now I have this functionality here. Cool. Good. So we've got all of our read functionality. We still need to create, update, and destroy. We're going to go through create, then we'll probably take a break because this is a lot. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll do update and destroy. Cool. So let's power through and do create. So now things that are already in my database, I can very easily access. Also, just know we have not restarted our server this entire time, so everything we've been doing has been updating, which is very nice. I'm going to get rid of show. I'm going to get rid of index. We're not going to use those right now. We're still going to be living in our business's controller, and we're still going to be messing with our routes. So the next thing I want to do is I need to create a new business. Now, creating a new business really has 2 steps. And this used to confuse me so much when I was starting out. And it's still a thing I have to remind myself, right? With 2 steps. First, we need to deliver the user a form to give us the information, right? We can't create anything until we know what we want to create. So step 1 is send them a form so that they can give me information. Step 2 is they send that form back. I pull all that info from params, and I can create my resource. Cool? So we're just going to do step 1. And then move on to step 2 because that seems like a good order to go in. So I'm going to add this route. Nope, not going to do that. Great. Here's my next route. And real quick, still completely following this, right? Just keep referencing this if you're like, where is this coming from?
Oh, can you go back to that?
I sure can.
Is that,
I love an oh moment.
Is that, oh, okay, so I see this. Okay, I see the controller action, the controller hashtag action.
Yep.
That's what
this is exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. So again, this is a great resource. It gives you everything you need to know, right? The verb, the route, the action, the controller, and then a little description of like what is actually happening here. And you can see we're doing remember I said step 1, sending the form. So we're doing a get to the resource /new, return an HTML form for creating the new photo. So we're not actually creating it with new. We're just delivering a form. So let's finish that. Great. Again, to /new. I don't need any info from the user for this because I'm just giving them the form. Controller action. What's our next step? Once I have the route defined, what do I need to do next?
Now we need to go and create the
Yep, we need to go create a controller for it. Why did I close that out? No, I didn't. Okay, cool. We need to not create a controller. I know what you mean, but just to be very specific about the language here, we're going to go to the controller and create an action for it. Create an action for it. Here's a quick thing about Ruby. This is the code we have right now. I'm sorry, not about Ruby, about Rails specifically. So this is my code for this right now. Damn it. I want this line up. Why is this doing it? Okay. Here's a Rails thing. Eventually, as we start seeing, Rails can actually do a lot of what we're doing right now, these steps I'm taking, there are shortcuts that Rails will do this for you. But I do not want to get to those yet because these lessons, these patterns are so important that you understand them. You might not end up getting a job using Rails, and a lot of frameworks still demand that you do this stuff yourself. It might not have as many generators. So that's why we're doing it this way. But we will definitely open up the world of Rails to you as we go. When we do that, this pattern of in new, creating a new business that is empty is going to be very helpful for us, right? But right now, we don't need to do that. There's really no reason for us to create a new business because when I create my view, which I'm going to do right now, new, what is this going to be called?
That's going to be called new. .html.erb.
Yep, new.html.erb. Let me pull this in here. I already have my form created. Here's my form. Do I want to get into why? I do not. Okay. So we don't need to do this right now. But just know that that's coming back. So I have my action here. What is that going to do? We're not really running any code. So it knows I have the new action. I can go into the views folder and look for a new view, right? Let's just check this out and see if this is working. No, what's happening? This is not finding my params. Oh, okay, I remember. Why isn't this working? It's saying businesses with ID/new. Why does it think ID is set to new?
Is it?
Look at our routes.
Oh.
Why?
Are you asking or do you know when you're asking?
I do know, but I am asking.
Because your ID is a symbol and new looks like a symbol.
Yes. Nice job, John. So remember here, we are saying that this route, when we hit this route, we're expecting to see businesses/anything, really, right? We know it's going to be an ID, and so we anticipated that here. We're saying, I'm going to get a number. Find only takes a number, so we're saying that's going to work, right? So this is an important lesson here. Our routes, Rails checks our routes in order, right? Sinatra's the same way, too. You might have hit this problem yesterday with Sinatra. And if you haven't, if you keep playing with Sinatra, eventually you will make this mistake, right? So the route we got was businesses/new. So businesses/a thing, which happened to be new. And in order, it went down. Was this a get to businesses? No, there was more to it, so that wasn't it. Was this a get to businesses/something? Yes, it was. It was businesses/new. I'm going to go ahead and set ID to new in params, and then I'm going to go to businesses show, right? So the very easy fix to this is just to invert these, right? So now we'll go in order. This one will only catch if I specifically write new, right? If I write anything else, it's not going to catch this one. This is going to match exactly, right? If it doesn't match that exactly, then it will go to this next one and hit ID. Does that make sense? Cool. So it's a small thing, but a thing that you can get hung up on if you aren't aware of the order that it checks everything. Cool. So let's go back. Hopefully this will work now. Cool. So I've got my form here. and my button and stuff. We'll break down the form for a minute. Now, here's the thing that I can't remember, but let's check it out. I believe if Rails gets to your controller and you don't want to run any code for that route, I don't think, or for that action, I do not think you need to define it. Pretty sure this will still work. Let's check it out, and then we'll go over what it's doing. Yeah, so we're still good. So just real quick, again, this is kind of like the magic of Rails, but also things we need to be careful of. It got to this route, right? It knows I want to go to the business's controller and I want to run the new action. It gets to the business's controller. It doesn't find a new action, but it knows by default, normally what I do at the end of that action is render a view. So it's smart enough to know, okay, there's no action. I'll just skip to that next step, which is grabbing the view, goes into the business's folder and grabs the view. Cool? So we don't need to even define that action. So now we are at we have completed part 1 of our create. We have part 2, which is actually making the resource. So real quick, going over this form, I have a form that's going to make a post request when it's submitted to /businesses. You can see that over here, right? This is our next thing. Our action is going to be photos create, and that's going to actually, or I'm sorry, businesses create. That's going to actually make our new thing. So we need to set that up. So now we're kind of away from entering our routes up in the browser. Now we've got this button that's going to execute the route for us, right? It's going to make the request for us because we set that up in our form. Just want to be very clear that we're still doing the same pattern. We are making a request. It is going to hit a route. That route is going to hit an action. That action is going to decide what to do from there. Cool? Okay. So right now when I submit this, I'm going to get an error. And very similar to before. No routes match post business. So I'm requesting a route that doesn't exist, or I'm making a request to a route that doesn't exist. So I'm going to, where is this?
So
okay.
If this was running on a server, not localhost,
yep,
and a user tried to do that same thing you just did, they would not get that page. They would get a 404 page.
Yes.
Correct?
They would get I think they would, what is 404 is?
Not found.
Not found. They would probably get a 404. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 404. Absolutely. Yes. Cool. So now I'm going to set a post to business. Oops. Yes. Except not with a 3, with an E. Cool. Comma. Where is that going to go?
It's going to go to
Still
businesses, hashtag create.
Yep. I'm going to have a create action. Nice. So I've defined this route. Just want to make sure this is going to work. Let's go back. Nice. So it hit my route, and now it's asking for my action. So I can go back into my controller. Hopefully this is here for me to copy. Okay. So this is going to be kind of a lot for this one. We'll go over it step by step. This format's a little bit better. Okay, that looks okay. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Let's talk about it. This messed up. All right, this looks ugly, but I'll fix it later. Okay, so here's my action. I want to create a new business, right? So I'm going to call business.new. Remember, that's how I create a new resource, business.new. I'm passing it this thing called business params, which we will come back to. But for just this second, you just need to know it's all the info I need to create a new business. Come back to that in a minute. Then I'm going to make sure it's saved to the database, right? If it does save, I'm going to do a redirect to businesses / the idea of the business I just created, which is what page?
Which would be that's the show page.
The show page for the business I just created, right? So I'm to redirect to this other route, which will go to my routes, and then bring me back to my controller and render my show page. Cool. If it does not save, so when I run this line of code, it will, one, actually try to save it to the database. So we'll actually do that. And then it will either be truthy or falsy, right? So if it doesn't save, it will return false. It did not save, which means it will not run this code, because if the if statement is false, it will go to its else. It'll redirect to, we want this to be my index page, and it'll just say you messed up. Cool. I'll get this flash message right here. Cool. Let's real quick talk about business params. So as the internet has been developing and as apps are getting bigger and more complex, so too have the ways to mess with people's databases, steal people's data, etc. Right? So it is in order to prevent people from sending bad data and doing something called SQL injection, which is where essentially, I don't know I can't do it myself, but my understanding of it is when I send data, I could send something like select all from credit cards, where, you know what I mean? And get all of these people's credit card numbers, right? I could send that, somehow inject that into the database and get something back. So before we create an asset, before we, especially before we create something or before we update something, we want to sort of make sure that we're getting clean data. And one way that Rails has built in to do that is by giving us this permit, right? So what this is doing is it's saying grab params, and when this method is called, grab params, and only permit these things from coming through, right? It also does some other checks and stuff. It gets a little bit more complicated with how it looks at data. There are more robust things that we can and will do as we start talking a little bit more about security and about like keeping, when we start doing authentication and stuff like that. But for right now, this is a good check right away, right? So right now it's going to do, and I think this is not business name. I'm trying to remember. It should just be name. Address description, right? If I add another attribute like business, I don't know, CEO or whatever, this would fail because I'm not allowing that to come through, right? Cool. So that's all this is. Short answer, this is making sure we're getting good data. After it does this, it actually returns the params, which is what ends up like getting put in here and creating the new business.
That private part?
Yes.
What is that doing? Is that
private that's just Ruby.
okay?
So when we have a class, that's just saying that this method can't be called outside of the class, right? So I couldn't go anywhere else in my app and call business params. That method is only able to be used in this model. Cool. Anything I declare below that private is only available in the model. Cool. Let's see. Let's see if this works. Whoops. Wait, that's not going to work. Cool. I'm not going to call my business John Shaletto. Let's just put a bunch of crap in here. So I'm going to make a business with a bunch of stuff, create it, and look, here I am. It took me right to the show page. It has my nonsensical address and description, and I can go back and I can also see it listed here in my index page. Cool. Let's try to do one where it blows up, and we can talk a little bit about those flash messages, and then we'll take a break. Do you remember the validations I put in? I validated two things. So name and address, I believe, have to be there. So if I just enter a description and try to create a business, doesn't work, right? It didn't bring me to the show page. It brought me back here to the index page, which is what I told it to do right here, redirect to /businesses. Now I have my flash error here. I'm setting this error. Flash is just this global, I don't know if it's global, but it's essentially this object that you have access to send messages to your user, basically, right? I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So, right, I set, basically what I'm doing is like going into it, it kind of works like a hash, might actually just straight up be a hash. And I'm setting the attribute error to this message right here. How do I get access to that? I can do it in my view. I could put it directly in the view, but I'm actually, because I want this to be available to me on every single page, just like before, I have my application layout, right? So this has been rendering every single time we render a view. It's doing the same thing. It's yielding here and putting whatever the view is in there. So if I want this on every page, I can just put it up here. And so you can see, this is killing me. You're killing me. I'm just making a paragraph tag, and I'm going to run some Ruby where I'm going to grab my success message. And this is just saying, like, unless it's blank, then don't run this. That way it won't error out if it's null. Same thing with error, right? So I can show the user something on their success. I can show it on their error. Let's go back and try this one more time. /new. I'm going to make one without this. Why is it up there that whole time? I do not know. Okay, it's gone now. Cool, and right here it's saying you messed up, my friend. Now, we'll get into how to, that's not really useful for the user, right? Like, how did I mess up? What actually went wrong? There's a way for us to get better errors for our user. Ideally, we would want to tell them you cannot create a business without providing a name and an address, right? And we'll get to that. But for right now, just knowing that we can show them errors when they occur is important. Cool. We still have two more things we want to do, update and delete. I do want to take a break for 5 minutes, and then we will get back into it. Are there any questions before we do that about what we've done so far? All right, cool. So let's come back. Let's just say we'll come back at 11:10. 7 minutes, 11:10. Okay, so we're back. We have done the create, and the read part of our app. We still need to do the update and destroy. We're going to follow that same pattern where we're going to create a route. We are going to send that to a controller action. We are going to then have that action render a view or do some things. Cool. Do some things. Very specific. Okay. Great. So the next thing we want to do is be able to edit a resource that already exists. That is very similar to creating a new resource where we have two parts to it. First, we need to deliver the user a form, and that form needs to already be filled out with the data, right? The data that they're going to update so that they know, like, what am I changing? What can I change? What am I changing? And how are those changes going to be reflected? That's part one. Then part two is we need to receive that new data and update it in our database. So we're going to have two routes to accomplish. We need two routes to accomplish this. First, we need to get the form. So it's similar to the new. We need to get the form. But we also need to know what resource we want to update. So that's why our route will look like this. Cool. We are making a GET request to businesses. We need the ID because we need to know which resource we want to update. And then we want to go to /edit. And that's going to let us know that that's going to send us to our edit action. Cool. So this route's got one little extra thing. It's a little bit longer, but that's why, because it needs to know this information. Cool. We're going to do the same. So we have that set in our routes. We can come into our controller. And set up our action. Okay, cool. What's happening here? We need the business. Remember, we need to know the business so that we can update it, right? There's something wrong here. Why is this green? I guess it just is green. Okay. Okay. So we're going to find the business the way we found it before when we were just showing it. We're going to use params. It's going to be in our URL. We're going to find it, and then we'll have access to it in our view, which we will create. Let's create a view in businesses. File. This one will be edit.html.erb. I'll put this huge block of text in here. Cool. What is this? Let's talk about this real quick. So we have a form, and there's two things to note in here. A form by default makes a post request, or a form, I think, can only make a post request. And so I think did John cover this yesterday, where we are hiding our put down here? If he didn't, I guess I'm covering it right now. The form can only make the post request, right? So in order to let the route know that I don't want to make a post, I don't want to make something new, I actually just want to edit something that already exists, which means I want to do a put request. We can use this workaround where we have this input field right here, and we can set it to type hidden, which means it will not show up on the page. And then we can give it some info. We can say it's going to have a method, and that method's value is put. Don't worry too much about the inner workings of this. Just know that this is the way we make a put request. This is how we can tell a form to make a put request. Cool. Again, when we get deeper into Rails, Rails will have some very nice methods that will render a lot of these forms for us. It's still important to know how they work. When this form is submitted, it'll start to make a post, but that'll be overwritten. It'll make a put request to /businesses. And it will take with it all of the information in this form, right? Now you can see this form looks very similar to our new form. It's pretty much the same. The only thing that we've added is because in our controller, we have set this business variable, we have access to it in the view, just like all of our other views. Anything we set in the controller, we have in our view. And so we can set the value, which is just going to essentially fill in the form with the data that already exists, right? So our name label will have the name filled in, our address will have the address filled in, etc. Questions about that? Cool. We got a little ahead of ourselves. I think I forgot to make our route, so let's make our route. I went a little out of order here. That's all right. Oh, no. I'm sorry. We did make our route. My bad. We made our route. I'm getting ahead. I'm going the other way. So let's just see this render. So I'm going to do / we'll just edit number 3, and then I can do edit, right? And that did not work.
You stopped the server.
When did I do that?
You closed it out.
Well, that was very stupid. There we go. So obviously we would eventually format this better because it looks horrendous. But here is our third resource with its name. We can change this and hit update. When I hit update, what's going to happen?
It's going to make a put.
It's going to make a put request to /businesses, which we have not defined yet. So it's going to tell us, maybe you should define a put to /businesses. And then it's /3, right? So we're also going to need to know the ID. So I'm going to copy this. We'll go into our routes. We'll do exactly what it told us. Here's my put to businesses. I need the ID because I need to know what I'm updating. My controller, my action. My action is going to be a little bit more involved, just like my create. Okay. So what am I doing here? I'm getting my business with the params ID. I'm going to call business. So before we were calling business.save and passing it business params. Remember, business params is just going to make sure that I'm not getting any data that's going to mess with my database. I'm only getting the data I want. Because we used a form, all of this data is going to come in the same way in params, labeled with these keys that I set in the name attribute. If that does update, I'm going to have a flash success that says updated successfully, and then I'm going to redirect them to the show page for that business so they can see what changed. If there's an error, I'm going to say you messed up, and I'm also going to redirect them back to the show page so that they can try again. Cool? Let's add, what is this? Is this delete, delete, delete? Cool. Let's try this out. Let's go, what do we want to do? We want to go to 3, edit. Oh, wait a minute. Cool. Let's just, I changed this. Update. Cool. And here's my update. I changed this. All right. Again, typing in /3/edit is annoying and a terrible user experience. So what I can do is go to my show page and add a link to edit. And I'm going to do / what do I need here? I need the
ID.
The business ID. Copy. Paste. Do I need to interpolate this? I always forget. Or is that set up already?
If it's in HTML, right?
I don't think so. I don't think I do in the HTML. Oh, we'll find out. Where did it go? Cool. I can never remember. And then /edit. And this needs to be ID. Let's see what that gives us. Let's do a break. Cool. So I have my back. I can go back here. I can click on this, and then I can go right to my edit page. Cool. So now I've created a much easier user experience. Great. So I can edit. The last thing I want to do is be able to delete, destroy stuff. Last thing, we'll do the exact same thing. We will define a route. It is a delete. 2/businesses. I need to know what I want to delete, so I'm passing the ID, and then I have the action. And come over here. This action is going to look a little bit different. Or actually, no, this should look pretty familiar. Man. The first thing I'm doing after this is looking up a formatter for this. I don't know why this is not doing what I want to do. Okay. Cool. When I get to destroy, I'm going to find the business, same way I've been doing before. I'm going to call .destroy on it, which is a very convenient method that does it for me. And then I will redirect to /businesses. Cool. What else do we need to know? Okay, we're missing one thing, which is just how do I do this? How do I hit this route, right? With destroy, I don't need a form. I don't need it to be a 2-step process. I just need to immediately send to the server, here is the business I want to delete. Please delete it for me. And the way we do that is I do need a form because that's the only way I can make this type of request. But the way I'm going to format it and style it, I do not need a separate view for this. I can go straight to my show page. And I'm going to allow I can do this anywhere, but I'm going to allow delete only on the show page. This is not going to give me a break. Cool. Talk through this real quick. Again, I have a form. Again, by default, it's going to make the post request. The action is I'm going to send it to the business ID, but then I'm going to use this hidden input to set the HTTP verb to delete. And then I'm just going to put one button that says delete. So pressing this button basically runs this action with the delete verb. Cool. That will hit my route, which is here, which will send me to my controller, which is here, which will take care of everything and redirect me. Let's see if this works. Let's go back to slash. Let's pick one that we, so this Killback LLC, here it is right here. I could edit it if I want to, but I have this delete right here. If I click delete, you can see it went in, deleted it, removed it from the list, and brought me back here. Cool. All right, so that was a ton of stuff. Thank you for sitting through it. It is all in your curriculum. I was copying, basically just copying code from the curriculum, so you can go back. I very much encourage you to go back and run through the curriculum. Particularly that first part, which seems like ages ago, where we set up the Rails app, because that process is going to have to happen every time. You're going to do Rails new. You're going to have to set things up to get going. And then also, so that was the big thing. We're starting to learn the Rails way. We're going to implement even more Rails-y things as we go. But then the other big lesson here that I really want crammed into your heads by the end of the week is this CRUD, right? These patterns for creating these CRUD apps. You can do a lot more. You can add a lot of stuff, but the skeleton is going to basically be the same. Cool. All right. Any questions before I stop? All right. You have, well, I'll go, let me stop this and we'll go to the challenges.